Well, I got R&R after serving 10 months down in Guantanamo. Was on my way back to Seattle, Washington to see my wife and daughter, knowing that I would be back in 2 weeks to finish the last 2 months of what would be a full year of duty down in Guantanamo. But what would happen when I came back to the United States, landing in Jacksonville, Florida? What would happen next? Well, I would be stopped in Jacksonville by many people. First, it was customs officials who would stop me. They would search through my bags. They singled me out on the plane. And then I learned that there were actually a lot of others who were involved in me being stopped that day. A lot of other OGAs, like the FBI. They were there also. And then I would even learn later that the FBI was the agency that had actually instructed the customs officials, even as early as a day before my arrival, to have me singled out, to identify me before I step off that plane, and to have my bag searched. And that's what happened. I was the only one searched that day. And these customs officials would then say that they found in my backpack what they called suspicious documents. That's what they called them, suspicious documents. And then out of nowhere, the FBI was there, and other military intelligence officers, Army counterintelligence, NCIS. And then they would say that these suspicious documents were actually classified documents. And then they would run and they would get an arrest warrant. And then I would be thrown in prison, which would ultimately be for 76 days. I was held incommunicado. I wasn't allowed to contact my family. I was held in isolation, initially incommunicado, solitary confinement. I was even threatened with the death penalty as these charges were being brought against me. Charges of spying, espionage, aiding the enemy, which are all capital crimes that you can be put to death for. We've heard this term enemy combatant coined by the current administration. Foreign enemy combatants, we know, are held down in Guantanamo and in other CIA black sites that we've heard about. But if you're deemed an enemy combatant and you're a U.S. citizen, you get put in the Consolidated Naval Brig in Charleston, South Carolina. People like Jose Padilla, Yasser Hamdi, who were categorized as enemy combatants and U.S. citizens. They were in that prison, the same prison in which I was sent. And that Army spokesperson would say in an interview that me being sent to this prison was only a coincidence. But I knew it wasn't a coincidence. How? Well, because of the way in which I was transported to this prison. I was thrown in the back of this truck in Jacksonville. I was shackled at the wrists, the waist, and the ankles, just like prisoners in Guantanamo are shackled. I was thrown in the back of this truck next to an armed guard. There were 2 other armed guards in the front. And then that armed guard in the back of this truck would take out of his canvas sack these goggles, plastic goggles, not ones that you can see through, ones that were painted black. And then he put them on my eyes. So now I couldn't see anything. The next thing he would take out of his bag was these heavy industrial type earmuffs, ear protection. Not to protect my ears, but to put them on my ears so I couldn't hear anything. I had these blackened out goggles, these earmuffs. I was shackled like a prisoner down in Guantanamo. I was being subjected to a tactic which we call sensory deprivation. That's what it's called, sensory deprivation. It's done to instill fear and intimidation and confusion in the subject. But guess what? I knew about this tactic. How? Down in Guantanamo, when I observed the prisoners being in process, I observed how they were being subjected to sensory deprivation. And I immediately recognized that I was being treated like an enemy combatant, not knowing where they were taking me, fearing for my life. And then when they threw me in this single solitary cell in the Consolidated Naval Brig, I was at least relieved that I was still alive. And it wasn't long after that in which I would then resign my commission from the U.S. Army, receiving that honorable discharge in January of 2005. And upon separation, I would also receive a second U.S. Army Commendation Medal for, quote, exceptional meritorious service. Now, how do you figure that one out? It's easy. Because what happened to me was clearly a gross miscarriage of justice, a huge mistake. Some people might ask, well, why do you think it happened to you? Well, I think I know why. 3 reasons. One is because I am a Muslim American in this very dangerous post-9/11 era, in which we've seen the civil liberties of all people in this country be eroded. But specifically, the American Muslim community has been under that much more scrutiny since 9/11. Being a Muslim made it easy for people to target me. For when they saw me pray, bowing and prostrating in the form of the Islamic prayer, when they saw me read the Holy Quran in the classical Arabic language, they recognized that this mirrored how the prisoners prayed and read the Holy Quran. And actually, this is how Muslims all over the world pray and read the Holy Quran. But to some few in Guantanamo, whether it was due to their ignorance or their hypervigilance, or whether it was due to their sheer bigotry, it meant to them that I was also the enemy, and they would target me. But I think this also happened to me because of my ethnicity. Being a Chinese American, being an Asian American, specifically a Chinese American, because I would learn through the information that was gathered by my attorney one of the initial accusations that was made against me. And that was made by someone who said, quote, "Who the hell does this Chinese Taliban think he is?" Telling us how to treat our prisoners. I was called a Chinese Taliban. Now, not just Taliban, but they called me a Chinese Taliban. And to me, that was a clear indication that someone was disturbed by my Chinese ethnicity. And the last reason is because of what I include in the subtitle of the book that I wrote, For a God and Country, Faith and Patriotism, Under Fire. My patriotism was under fire. Because when I objected to some of the things that were happening in Guantanamo, things that went against our own values as a nation, the use of religion against prisoners, inhumane treatment of prisoners, cruel and degrading, potential war crimes, it was my duty to raise these concerns. And I did it professionally as an officer in the United States military, as a chaplain. But this was disturbing to some people. Maybe it was threatening to those people who were engaged in this abuse. And that was a reason for them to target me. That's my story. That has been my experience as a Muslim chaplain who served in Guantanamo, who served in the U.S. military, praised and recognized, and then treated like the worst terrorist spy, only ultimately to be cleared and receive an honorable discharge. So my talk today, I hope it's one that has been eye-opening, educative, and hopefully inspirational, so that everyone who has heard my story will realize that we are indeed in a dangerous time where we need to fight for our Constitution, fight for civil liberties, fight for human rights, and to adequately address the challenges of balancing both national security and civil liberties in this country.